David,
Roger,
how you going?
I'm good, man. I'm good.
It's another episode of Common Ground. It's becoming a bit of a habit for us. If you're very new to the show, Common Ground, it's a podcast that we do. We break down big topics into bite-sized chunks so everyone can have better conversations. Now, today's a pretty cool topic. We're diving into renting versus home ownership. It's not just a financial decision, but it's actually a lifestyle choice. And at the moment, it's really a reflection of how the world is changing, whether we want to own things, renting things, how we want to invest our money, and is owning a home the ultimate goal? So these are some of the things we're going to talk about today. So David, I'm pretty excited for this episode. How about we start with a bit of a layman's introduction to renting, home ownership, and everything in between?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the majority of people in our generation, we're both millennials. I guess owning a home was considered to be the signal of adulthood. You've made it. Definitely, at least in the UK and Australia and New Zealand. And that's what we're most familiar with, what we're mostly going to talk about today. But for many people, that dream is becoming more of a dream and less achievable, right? It's slipping away for a lot of people. In the UK, for instance, the percentage of home ownership amongst 25 to 34-year-olds, which is pretty much in the younger millennial bracket, it's actually halved since the 90s. So before it was around 50%, now it's around 28%. Australia, house prices are up 400% since the mid-90s. That's crazy. 4 times as much. While the wages, they haven't grown at the same pace. And in New Zealand, it's even more extreme, right? In 2021, home ownership hit a 70-year low in New Zealand, which is only 65%, which sounds like a lot. It's more than the UK still, but back in the day, it was 90% of people owned their own homes. Yeah. At the same time, a lot of people are questioning, does it really make sense to own a home? People are more open to having flexible lifestyles and maybe moving around more and having different kinds of experiences. There was a study in Australia in 2023 where around 40% of young people were actually unsure if they wanted to own property ever in their life. It's things like remote work, mobility, minimalism that are changing the way people are prioritizing home ownership. And the question isn't maybe now, can you buy a home, but should you, or do you want to?
It's interesting questions. I think that traditional mentality of owning where you live and, the white picket fences was an idea beforehand. But now, a lot of young people, they're choosing travel. They want flexibility. They want to move a lot. They want to try different areas, different cities, different countries. In terms of the flexibility side versus stability side, what are we seeing?
I think this is probably one of the key arguments for and against home ownership. Renting obviously means a lower upfront cost. You have more cash liquidity and you can move more easily, right? Especially now that things are a little bit uncertain around the world. In Australia, the average home deposit is over 150K Australian in most major cities, while renting is just a few weeks of bond, right? So you have a lot more flexibility with your cash. In the UK, being able to move between cities or from here to Europe is a lot easier if you're a tenant because you can't just pack up and leave if you own a home, right? In New Zealand, for instance, a lot of renters are choosing, or they can afford to rent in places they could never afford to buy in. So they're prioritizing the lifestyle over necessarily building capital. Obviously, ownership, on the other hand, offers you stability. It's something that you can call your own and you have more protection, I suppose, than maybe as a renter. But for some people, flexibility in itself has value. It's an asset, and other people value stability more. The pressure to buy just to get on the ladder shouldn't make the decision for you if it's the right financial move, right?
Yeah, I think that you really got to weigh up in terms of what you believe is wealth, because there's multiple different types of wealth. And, owning a home is just one type. And also it may not align to, what you want to achieve. So do you want to talk a little bit more about, wealth building and where property fits in? Because I think that's something that, a lot of the millennials are trying to consider at the moment.
When I was growing up in New Zealand, we used to have an expression, I think we have it in Australia as well, which is safe as houses, right? Buying property is like guaranteed wealth builder, guaranteed way to be secure financially. The recent years have shown us that it's not necessarily true, right? Think about in New Zealand, during COVID, the house prices went up through the roof. And then in 2021, that was the peak, and they've dropped almost 20% since then. It shows that the housing market doesn't just go upwards, it also goes backwards, right? In the UK right now, house price growth is flat. You're not really making money. In fact, because of inflation, if you tie up a lot of money in your house, you might even be worse off. And in Australia, the mortgage costs are 50, 60% more than they were a couple of years ago. So paying off the mortgage is sometimes a lot more expensive than actually renting. And on top of that, you have all the other running costs that you have for a house, like maintenance, insurance, council tax, or rates. It all eats into the returns that you're going to get as a homeowner. However, on the flip side, if you're a renter and you instead deploy your capital in the stock market or something like this, because this can also generate a solid return for you. So buying property can be smart if it suits the lifestyle and the goals that you have, but it's not a guaranteed win for sure.
Yeah, it can definitely bite you. I think there's also a lot of hidden costs, right? Like when you own a property, there's maintenance, there's, if it's an apartment, there's strata, there's stamp duty in Australia, and others like taxes in terms of when you purchase a property. So it's such a huge capital cost up front. And even when you sell it, there's further taxes and potential tax implications. Traditionally, 30, 40 years ago, buying a property was probably a lot more seamless. And also there was a lot less to really worry about. And I think as well, with the higher cost of living at the moment, it's a lot harder to save a dollar than it was 40, 50 years ago. Talking about the modern lifestyles and, where people are seeing value, is that making a big shift as well in terms of people who are doing mortgaging versus renting? Do we just like going out for brunch, or what's the deal?
Listen, we all know the memes about eating avocado toast, like that.
Yeah, that's where that's where the savings is going, mate. That's what they're saying.
To a certain extent, it's true, right? People in our generation are prioritizing different things, and those priorities might not necessarily be putting down roots, buying large illiquid assets and staying there for the next decade or whatever. I think next to the financial considerations of renting versus buying, there's also the lifestyle considerations. I think pandemic, especially remote work, people have seen, okay, I can maybe live in Bali and service customers in Australia, for instance, or here in the UK, it's common to move to Portugal and then still keep your job from the UK. In the UK, in fact, the number of people that work fully remotely has doubled between 2019 and 2023. It's becoming a lot more widespread and accepted. I remember when I started my career, the people that were fully remote, they're the weirdos. Like, we never see those guys.
That's Jim. That's Jim out in, some middle of nowhere.
He shows up every 2 years to get a new laptop, like that kind of thing.
Right?
Yeah. In Australia, there's this trend that they're calling rentvesting, which is, it's something that I basically do, right? I rent where I want to live, which is London, but then I invest where I can afford to invest, which is, in my case, in New Zealand, right? I have some property over there. It's becoming a pretty legit and mainstream kind of strategy because often the rental costs can be a lot lower than the mortgage costs for the same kind of property. And I think a lot of people are kind of prioritizing, as I said, these experiences more over assets. Living in Europe for some time, doing a year-long sabbatical in South America or whatever. These are things that you can't do as easily if you have a huge mortgage kind of hanging over your head. And I think the last point in terms of cultural changes is, I think in the past there was a bit of a stigma around renting. Oh, you're not maybe like a failure, but this guy's not stable. Like, he's only doing this for a time. Or the classic is you got divorced, kicked out of the family home, and now you're in a crappy rental apartment. I think these kinds of stigmas are sort of fading away. And I think a lot of people are sort of valuing renting and the flexibility that comes with renting as a potential lifestyle choice. And I think what it shows to us is that owning a home isn't a compulsory checkbox that you have to do to become an adult. So I think there's a lot of other things that could show that you're mature and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people also make some decisions around, well, where do I actually want to live and where's going to be a worthwhile investment? And typically those two aren't the same. So they may live close to the city or close to the beach for their lifestyle, but that's probably not going to be the best place it's going to really grow. Whereas they could buy somewhere in like a regional town, make significantly more money, and you've got to make those decisions, right? And it's true. Like I think a lot of people also diversify. They buy stocks, or they look at other ways they can invest. Businesses, etc. They might start a podcast, for example.
Yes.
The world's your oyster. So we normally like to leave everybody with a question to impress. So if they're at the table, something to spark a conversation and get the creative juices going. So what do we want to leave the audience with?
I think this one's a little bit more of a niche question. What we're seeing is a lot of, in the UK, they call it build to rent. And maybe in Australia and New Zealand, you call it more corporate landlords, companies that are basically building big apartment complexes, whole neighborhoods that are designed to be rental properties. And obviously, if the market dynamics are allowing them to do that, there clearly is demand for people that want to maybe permanently rent. So the question is, with those changes in terms of how property is being built, are we seeing like a long-term shift in terms of home ownership is in terms of renting over ownership as the default way to live? I think this is a good conversation that you can have in a table of people that some rent, some own. It's a great way to get the conversation started.
Someone's definitely going to say, I just bought at the right time. It always seems to come up. Everyone says that. I've found the right place, bought at the right time.
Yeah.
Look, it's been really good, David. I actually learned a lot from this. I'm currently weighing up if I keep, rent vesting or if I take the plunge and, buy my home. So learned a lot today, and I really hope our audience did too. If you do like some of the content that we're sharing, please let us know. If you got any feedback of other topics you want us to talk about, send them through to our socials. Yeah, thanks again for your time, and thanks, David, and catch you on the next one.